Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody, to Healthy Living Live. We have our man of the hour, Dr. Doug Lisle, back by popular demand. And when I say popular demand, we just had our live Ultimate Weight Loss Conference in Vegas, and people are giving us feedback about what they liked and what they want to see more of. And Dr. Lisle, people said they could have watched you and Dr. Goldhammer just the whole time. Your Q&A that went for about an hour and 15 minutes, they said it could have been 2 or 3 hours. And they say they just love to see you talk. So I'm really honored that Dr. Lisle is doing this for us about once a month, and today of all days, which is his birthday. So happy birthday, Dr. Lisle.
Oh, thank you. And this is what AJ sent me, everybody. So I now have I've got treats to eat during our session today.
Absolutely. I couldn't send you a carrot cake, so I did the next best thing and sent you some fruit. So, see, he really does eat, guys. So what I did is I posed questions to the people that actually came to the conference, because some of them didn't get their questions answered, not because you weren't generous with your time. You sat in that booth for hours, but some of them didn't come to the carnival Saturday night. And actually, some of them had questions based on some of the things you talked about. So I think they're pretty good questions. But before I ask the first question, there's a comment from Juanita. She says, don't have any new questions, but please convey to Dr. Lisle how much I really appreciate all he does for the members of the Ultimate Weight Loss Program. I personally have benefited immensely, more than words can express, from all of the interviews, YouTube videos, and the replays. He always addresses the questions I have, and every time I listen or watch, which is frequently, I learn something new or a new slant on the subject. Let him know how much we more than appreciate him, and I think that's everybody's. And thank you guys. If you really appreciate Dr. Lisle, you're going to share this broadcast in real time. So the first question I think is a real good one, and I'm going to take myself off screen so you can see how nice Dr. Lisle looks in his Hawaiian shirt. Is that people want to know how they keep the momentum high post-conference. How do they keep it going?
Well, the thing that we're looking for is we're looking for a particular internal signal. When you're at the conference, what you get is you get a lot of you got external signals coming in that you're part of the group and that you're on the right track. You're doing very positive things. And so what this is, and you feel when you're a member of that group, you feel valued because you're who it is that you are. Your identity as a person who's trying to live healthfully is being affirmed by everybody around you. So this is going to be what we call esteem. And that's a very good feeling, and it's a pretty loud feeling. In other words, when people give you good feedback, that's what's supposed to be the loudest signal, sort of telling you that you're either going in the right direction if it's positive or in the wrong direction if it's negative. So we're very sensitive to these esteem signals from other people. But what we need to do when we go home is we need to get tuned in to a quieter signal that is very, very similar. It's got a similar feel to it, but it's probably, I don't know, 10% of the intensity. And that's the internal audience. It's the very reason why you can feel good at the conference is that you know that you are trying to do something very good for yourself, and you also know that it's not an easy thing to do, and that but you know that you have earned some esteem, even if you struggled and relapsed and gone back and forth and have all kinds of challenges. Just the fact that you are there and that you are committed personally to try to move this direction and do well, and if you've had very good success and have done very well, all of those things are things that you know about you that are deserving of respect from other people. And when you get it and you're surrounded by it, that is esteem, and that feels very good. But you also have another internal signal that's really the most important one to learn about, and that is because esteem signals from other people, they're so impactful emotionally that you can't miss them. But what you can miss is you can miss a very quiet signal that we call self-esteem. And that's from your internal audience that's observing you. And so the way you keep the momentum going on this program is actually getting attuned to or learning to essentially be an expert and be sensitive to the self-esteem signals, the signals that come from within. My colleagues, who I enjoy criticizing, I don't, but in psychology, it's very often the internal criticism that often happens is usually seen as pesky, annoying, a curse, a problem with human psychology, you know, some kind of bad thing. In cognitive therapy, they call it the internal critic. I have a significantly different view, even though I understand what my colleagues are saying, and I understand that they've been troubled by this, and they understand that people suffer from this dynamic. I don't believe that they understand the dynamic, and so my understanding, which is based in part on Mark Leary's work in sociometer theory, which is a fancy way of saying that there's been new information since cognitive therapy was developed in the 1960s, is the notion that we have an internal audience that is watching us. And so it isn't just the audience on the outside that we're sensitive to, but also we have an internal device, an important part of who it is that we are, that is observing our actions. And so often in therapy, that internal audience is being critical. And so it's little wonder that therapists have considered this to be an annoyance and something to be stamped out or argued with, or otherwise, you know, they would just assume they could take a laser and go in and wipe it out. But the truth of the matter is, it's not a critic, it's an audience. And this is a critical distinction. I guess you could call it a critic in the most formal sense of the word critic, which is observer, and neither being critical nor praising. In other words, being a neutral observer. But that's not what they're referring to. They're referring to that it seems to be irrationally critical and nasty. Now, folks, when your internal audience is beating you up and criticizing you, I would argue that it almost always has a point. That it isn't always right and doesn't always have things in perspective, but it generally has a point. And so what we want to do is we want to get sensitive to the fact that when we do things well, the internal audience is not critical. It's actually praising us. But sometimes that praise feels pretty quiet. It's not like the praise and support that you get at the conference. It's a much more subtle signal that it feels good. I want you to get used to it. This is similar to get used to looking for it. This is similar to a similar parallel issue goes on when people do a lot of healthy living because they get educated and they do this. The thing that keeps them on a path of healthy living is not, in fact, the reduction of fear from heart attacks or cancer. That is a sideline. What actually keeps us on a healthy path is what it feels like to feel healthy. That's what keeps us on a healthy track. So when I wander off, if I wander into a piece of carrot cake, which I will occasionally do, the next morning I don't feel quite as good. Okay, I might even have some tonight on my birthday dinner, but I might not. And it'll be a little dicey about whether I do or I don't, because after all, it's my birthday, so I can legally and appropriately have a piece of carrot cake if I want. But at the same time, I might not even do it. And the reason is that tomorrow morning, if I have a piece of carrot cake tonight, which I would like, I won't feel quite as good. Okay, and I can tell the difference. And so whenever I kind of maneuver out of line, I can feel the difference. But the only reason I can feel the difference, folks, is I'm looking for it. Okay. When I used to be a conventional leader, when I was 20 years old, I didn't know the difference because every day felt okay, and I was filling myself with the same kind of junky food every day, so I didn't really know the difference. It wasn't until my friend Alan pounded these truths down my throat that I had enough healthy meals in a row that I found out what it felt like to feel right. And then whenever I got out of line, then I could tell the difference. So the way we keep our momentum in this arena is really getting sensitive to two things, but particularly the one that I'm most interested in, the psychologist, is watching the internal audience's praise. Praise is subtle, okay, but it's beautiful. It's a feeling of rightness with the world, that where you're doing a good job. That's what, that's what also keeps me eating clean, because when I eat clean, I also feel right physically. So, if I eat a little bit out of line, I don't feel terrible. I just don't feel quite as good. And when I don't do quite as good a job on my diet, I also, or anything else, if I'm not quite as sensitive and pleasant to other people as I should have been, then I don't feel quite as good. My internal audience recognizes that I was a little bit impulsive and I was a little bit not as kind as I could have been. And it watches me and it gives me that feedback and it says, yeah, that was some B minus work today that you did there. And so, and I want to feel as good as I can all the time. So I'm not a fanatic about it, and I make plenty of mistakes, both interpersonal processes and in my diet and other things. But the idea is to get sensitive to those changes. So if you want to know how to contain your momentum, the answer is to become a relatively careful observer of your internal process, because when you see that, you'll know what's causing you to feel good. And what causes you to feel good is to do a good job.
That's brilliant, Dr. Lisle. A lot of people online are agreeing with you. Sherry's saying, I completely agree. Now that I feel so great from eating clean, I'm not tempted by non-compliant food because I know that food makes me feel bad. No thanks. So a lot of people are agreeing with you. A lot of people are wishing you happy birthday. And you might want to know that you share a birthday with Tina's Rottweiler. So that's
very cool.
And you're the opposite of a Rottweiler. You're more like I would say you're like a golden retriever or a yellow lab. So this isn't a question, but I want to say it before I forget, because you talked about possibly creating a new talk for Vegas. The last 20 minutes of the joint Q&A where you talked about balancing the ego trap and the pleasure trap, that was some of the best concise way to explain it, and people can see that on YouTube, or if they're on my mailing list, we sent it out today. So Tracy was saying that she would love it if you could prepare a longer lecture on that topic full of stories and your awesome drawings. So I wanted to put it out there as a possibility.
That's a very good idea, AJ. Okay, you can remind me of this. That's good.
Absolutely. I think so as well. So we have gotten so many questions about what you presented on sleep. And there's another YouTube you did with me about the connection with Alzheimer's that people, if they're on my mailing list, they were sent today and they can watch that. And you also talked about it at the conference. So since so many of the questions are on sleep, I'll just read all 4 or 5 of them, and then you can go in any direction you want. Right. So for example, Angie said, for those, like she's a nurse, and she said, for those of us who may have damaged our brains from working night shifts and constantly switching sleep patterns, can we repair the damage we have caused? Joe says, is there ever a case where pharmaceutical assistance could help with somebody dealing with sleep issues or an erratic brain in general? We have a lot of people that are not convinced that coffee is that bad, especially if they've already given up something like alcohol, which they feel is worse. And then we have people that are waking up at night. For example, maybe they are new mothers and they're waking up at night, or maybe they're older people like myself that are getting up to pee and they seem to have trouble going back to sleep. And so they're worried that they're risking illness by waking up and not being able to get back to sleep. So we got a lot of people here that need your help.
Right. I won't remember all these questions, but let me see if I can talk a little bit more broadly.
Well, the first one was about shift workers, like nurses. Have they done permanent damage, or can they repair the damage?
Yeah, you have done permanent damage, but there's no reason to catastrophize over this. A lot of us have done quite a bit of permanent damage, so that doesn't mean that the damage is severe. It just means that the answer is yes. it would appear to be the case. I think that, for example, when you reverse heart disease with an Esselstyn program, you can reverse it, but it's probably the case that some of the tissue that, even though when you've done a bunch of reversals, probably can't get perfect. You know what I mean? You could probably get it back to excellent, but probably not as good as it would have been had it never been damaged before. So that's how you have to look at this sort of thing. So so I never catastrophize over the past. It's all about if you have function now, and what we want to make sure that we do is we protect the function very carefully that we have left, and that we're not careless with it. And with any luck at all, by doing a good job from here on out, we won't have any catastrophic results as far as this goes. But I would expect, let's suppose that you're, if this person's a nurse, and let's suppose that let's suppose on some math test she could get 86 out of 100 if we gave it to her today, and that when she was 80 years old she could still get 78 out of 100. And now, maybe with quote, a little bit of damage that's been done, maybe she could only get 77 or 76 out of 100. It's not like we should have any big issue if we step on this and we make sure that we protect the brain as best we can from here. In the vegan world, or the hyper healthy vegan world, we've been very concerned about vascular disease inside this problem, because we've been understanding that the brain has to be flooded with nutrition, and it needs to be that if we clog up the arteries and we clog up the cardiovascular system, cerebral vascular system, that we're going to get significant damage. It was Caldwell Esselstyn that explained to me many years ago that when they CAT scanned brains of people that were 50 years old, they would see all these tiny, tiny little micro dots all over the screen, and they didn't know what they were. And then, of course, what they were was very, very tiny little strokes. Essentially, very small areas of the brain were having clots in them, and that they were being essentially shut off, and a little bit of cell death was taking place all over the brain in thousands of locations. That makes perfect sense. And yet you couldn't see any difference in the people's cognitive function, because it was declining very slowly and very slightly. So it's a little bit like a car that you take very good care of it, but even you keep it in the garage and you take it to a nice car wash once a week, but as little tiny nicks get in there every now and then. Some, even very well cared for, it's not the same as when it's brand new. So this is way too long a way of saying, don't worry about what's happened in the past. Our job is to make sure we take very good care of it in the future. So, so some other questions that come up from this are things like, what if you get up in the middle of the night to pee? This is not a crisis at all. And if you can't get back to sleep, that's okay. Our job, though, is to be looking for times during the morning and that day when you may find yourself tired. And if there's a way for you to get sleep, then do it. If it's at all feasible. So we're not worried too much about these things. However, we do want to have good habits to make it less likely that you have to get up and pee. But we may not be able to do this. People's bladder size is different. And it's also true that people in their natural history typically probably did not sleep through the night. There was enough threats in the environment and enough anxiety about going to sleep and being subject to predators that you were a little edgy, and after you go through 2 or 3 sleep cycles and you slept 3 or 4 or 5 hours, it wouldn't be surprising for people to wake up. And so, and they might not get back to sleep for a while. So we have enough of if you're one of those people, we want enough of an expansive time between when we go to bed and when we have to do something the next day, that we might be up for a while in the middle of the night. And we may be up for an hour, or we may be up for 2 hours. And then when we go back to sleep in the late morning, and then sleep for another sleep cycle or two. So we're not going to worry about, it's not a problem if sleep is disjointed. Sleep comes in chunks. Those chunks are about an hour and a half long for a given individual. They're sleep cycles. And so it's unlikely that people during the nighttime ever wake up in the middle of a sleep cycle. I mean, they just almost certainly would never do this. You go down into a sleep cycle and then back up and then down and then up. Very often when people wake up needing to pee, they've gone 2 cycles. So they'll say, yeah, I always wake up at 2 a.m. and they go to bed at 11. So they wake up after the second cycle. What's happened is that the brain has cleaned itself quite a lot. So the person is now not nearly as fatigued after 3 hours of sleep as they were when they went to bed. The brain is essentially a device that gets dirty during the day. It's kind of like a restaurant. All kinds of things are happening. Stuff's being chopped, stuff's being cooked, dishes are being dirtied. That's what's going on in the business of thinking and making decisions and taking actions during the day. At the end of the day, in the nighttime, that's like the night shift comes in and cleans up that restaurant. That's what the night shift is. And for the question about coffee, the answer is when you drink coffee, you are stopping the night shift from doing its job well. So you still have a night shift in there, but somebody's got a broken arm and they can't clean up as much. So by the time the next morning rolls around, the restaurant is not clean. And then you start the next day with a restaurant that's a little bit messed up and therefore not fully functioning. And then we wind up with problems. Now, when it comes to using caffeine, what's actually happening is that there's a chemical in your brain that builds up with every waking hour. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's called adenosine. And I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly. There's probably 7 different pronunciations. But what this is it's essentially a signaling device that as it grows in concentration, it's making you increasingly likely to feel sleepy. So the longer you go, if you're fully sleep satiated and you wake up in the morning, your concentration of adenosine is very low. And then so low that you're not going to feel sleepy. And now as the day goes on, it's getting more and more and more and more concentration. As the brain is getting dirtier and dirtier from all the debris that's taking place because of all the cooking that's going on in the kitchen, neurons are firing. There's byproducts of that neurological firing are taking place. Basically, the thing is starting to get backed up. Now, as that happens, adenosine is growing in concentration, and it's causing the organism to feel sleepy. What caffeine does is it blocks the action of adenosine. It actually stops you from feeling sleepy. Now, this is big trouble, folks. If you have torn ligaments in your ankle, and I give you a drug that blocks the pain of the torn ligaments in your ankle, then that would cause you to walk on that ankle and do further damage, and you wouldn't know that it was happening. And in the same way, if you use coffee, you are firing on a brain that wants to sleep, okay, that is actually fatigued, and it's making you feel like it's not fatigued, okay? And so this is why coffee is such a mess and it's hard for people to get out of. Now, when it comes to the crimes of health, how great is it? It's not very great. It's I call all these things the minor sins. So coffee's a minor sin. Cigarettes are a major sin. What are other minor sins? Oh, I don't know. Sugar on your oatmeal, minor sin. Okay, these are all, but coffee's bigger than that. It's quite a bit bigger. So anything that's disrupting sleep, alcohol is a more significant sin than the coffee. It's going to be more impactful. But the alcohol and coffee both are actually significantly disruptive to sleep cycle, and they're causing people to be chronically sleep deprived. So chronic sleep deprivation is a much, much bigger health issue than I didn't have any idea. And so in examining the evidence now that I've looked at in the last 3 months, I knew it was there, but I just didn't know that it was as big as it is. And it doesn't surprise me now that I'm seeing the evidence. So I'm going to just recap that evidence for people who haven't heard this. The evidence indicates that people that are 6-hour night sleepers as opposed to 8-hour night sleepers are twice as likely to die of a cardiovascular event. So that is in the same class with diet. Okay, it's getting close. The people that are 6-hour day sleepers as opposed to 8-hour day sleepers are 40% more likely to get cancer. That is also in the same class with diet. Okay, in other words, these are very similar effects to the effects that we see of the difference between a conventional diet and a good diet. So it isn't like diet is 3 times more impactful than sleep. It's more like, it's pretty close to 1-to-1, maybe 2-to-1. So diet is the king, but sleep is definitely the queen. And exercise is the bishop. Okay, exercise is not as impactful as either one of these things. And so so you should, I just had a lady the other day say to me, wow, I'm so glad you told me this, because I've been waking up early in the morning to go exercise because I felt like that was so important. And it's been, it's hard for me to do this. And I said, absolutely not. Do not wake up early in the morning so that you can get in your exercise. You are vastly better off sleeping to satiety. You want to sleep to satiety as many nights out of 7 as you can. That's how we want to do this.
Terrific. And so Kristen and Janice are saying, well, what do you do when you wake up at 3 in the morning? I suggest just putting on something that Dr. Goldhammer has recorded, and you'll get right back to sleep.
Oh, that's beautiful, AJ. Yes, that works every time. Works for me. Actually, if you wake up, there's these big individual differences in people's circumstances. What I want to do is I want to back something up, because there's, I don't know, there's like cognitive behavioral treatment for insomnia, and it's successful to some degree, and we can talk till literally the cows come home about how it is that we're, how it is that we could manage to get rid of our sleep problems. Now, let me back the camera up and take a much wider angle view of these problems and see what we can see. Almost all health problems that we can do something about, not all, almost all, okay? If I don't know, get cut in a basketball game and it turns out I have some raging staph infection and it looks like it's going to my heart, I will take antibiotics, okay? Alan had that happen to him 20 years ago and he did not take the antibiotics. And he immediately did a water fast and he sat right there for 5 days and watched his arm. And he watched the staph infection go up his arm, and he watched it and he watched it and he watched it. And he now I remember him telling me, he said, boy, this is one heck of an infection, because it's pretty hard to stand up to the human body when it's healthy on a water fast. And he ultimately did not have to take the antibiotics. The immune system was able to knock it out. Nobody else in their right mind would have done what he did, but he knew what he was doing. But I wouldn't have had that kind of confidence, and I would have gone to the doctor, Dr. Sultana, or one of our docs, or Dr. Lim, and I'd say, okay, you do what you do. So, however, of the vast majority of health problems that we can do something about, mostly what we need to do is diet, sleep, and exercise. That's mostly what it is. And most of the problems that people have with diet and sleep and exercise are simply the result of the modern world versus the ancient world. In the ancient world, these problems did not exist. People didn't have bad diets because there wasn't any such thing as a bad diet, because they didn't have bad foods. There wasn't any such thing as an exercise deficiency and needing to go to the gym, because you had to work hard all day long just to get enough of the really healthy food that you needed to eat to survive. and people didn't have anything like remotely resembling insomnia. How on earth are you going to have insomnia? There's no fancy flat screens with all sorts of interesting things to look at till the middle of the night. Okay? And there are not sort of psychologically stressed people worrying about things at the office, but all they do all day long is use their fingers. No, the people that were using their fingers were picking stuff and hiking up and down river valleys and gullies and so forth. And by the end of the day, they were very, very comfortably, solidly, physically worked and fatigued. And trust me, if that's how it was, you weren't waking up at 3 a.m. Not possible. You weren't like, gee, I just can't get back to sleep. It's like, oh, yes, you can. You never woke up. And if you did wake up, you woke up because you heard some hyena, whine a little too close. And that got you up at the top of a sleep cycle. But as soon as you saw that everyone was safe and that some other hyper-conscientious nutcase was awake and they were gonna guard everybody, you went comfortably back to sleep. Okay? So the reason I'm saying this is that insomnia is a joke. Okay? People are looking for the reasons for insomnia, and we had another question about would there be a time and place for some medications for this. Now, I could be a nice guy and say yes, or I could be tougher and say, not really, okay? Not if we're wanting to get to the root of the problem. If you had some reason why we wanted to step around a problem for a short period of time, we might consider it, but some sleep aid. But the truth of the matter is that we would never look to this as a long-term solution for anything. And the reason is, the only reason we have the problem is we've got some shift in reality between the human nature and the current environment that we find ourselves in. And the solution is to fix the environmental disturbance. It's not to alter the human. Okay? So that would mean that a lot of people that, quote, have insomnia are using coffee, they're wiring up the system, they're using alcohol, so that they're disrupting their sleep cycle. They are staying up way too late. They're fatigued, so they're therefore not exercising very much the next day. So, etc. They may be eating, foods that wind up being very uncomfortable for them to digest, and then they're in pain and they've got inflammation. If they're eating a lot of sodium, they can wake up in the middle of the night thirsty, which is an extremely common reason for people waking up in the middle of the night, by the way. Not all the people that we're talking about here necessarily, but that is a major reason that people wake up in the middle of the night, is that they are thirsty as a result of eating a diet that's 10 to 15 times higher in sodium than human beings were designed for. So as a result, when we take the salt out of the diet, we take the caffeine out of the diet, we take the alcohol out of the diet, we take the sedentary lifestyle out of the diet, we take the supernormal stimuli on screens out of the diet, we get the sun going down, we have the person working physically hard all day long. Now, do we have any sleep problems? And people roll their eyes and say, well, I can't do all those things. It's like, well, then no surprise that they've got 40 million people addicted to sleep aids. Okay?
Yeah.
And yet it's not really restoring high quality sleep, and it's not really helping them. So the answer to the question is, usually we want to walk the problem back to the Stone Age, and we want to see what is the root of the problem in the modern environment that is the cause of a disconnect between human nature and the environmental inputs that the person is being subjected to. And usually when we fix that, we fix the problem.
Thank you. I find as I get older, my sleep even more precious.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly enough, in this book, Dr. Matthew Walker, who's the head of the sleep lab at UC Berkeley, obviously a fabulous scholar that wrote this book called Why We Sleep. He explains that your need for sleep does not decrease in age, which is very interesting. A lot of things that I learned so much from this book, I just can't praise it enough. I'm going to have to go back. This is one of these books. There's books that I'm destined to read once. There's books that I'm destined to read only half of the time because I'm skimming it half the time. And there's books that I'm destined to read 5 times. And Why We Sleep is one of these books that I'm going to end up reading 5 times. It's that good.
Well, The Pleasure Trap is one of those books you could definitely read 5 times. So people are saying, but is decaf coffee okay? Or what about more natural sleep aids like magnesium supplements or melatonin?
Yeah, remember, our ancestors didn't need any sleep aids. So why is it that we're having a sleep aid? The answer would be, no, let's correct the problem between the person and their environment. Let's do that. Let's search for the solution that way. Decaf coffee. Now listen, I am, as I've told people, my grandfather was a Methodist minister, and so it comes pretty easy to me to be kind of preachy. I've been my parents and my sister always like sort of rolled their eyes at me. I was the youngest in the family, and yet I was the preachiest, even at 10 years old. So it comes easy to me. But I've got an accepting psychologist side that, of course, my friend Alan doesn't have. And so as a result, I want to temper this. We are talking about some things that are useful to know about, but they're not at the level of some of the major health problems that we generally try to address. We try to go after big things in people's diet. We want to get rid of the unhealthy, horrendous things. We want to get rid of the rich foods that are causing all kinds of mischief and causing people to be overweight and disrupting their lives in a myriad of ways, not just physically, but also emotionally. So we want to do all those things. When we start talking about decaf coffee, let's understand what we're talking about. We're now starting to work our way down through some reasonably fine details, but they're not trivial. And that's kind of what it is that's why we're having this conversation, is because the people that I'm talking to are already very well educated in some of these other major issues, and they understand that there's challenges, but they're working towards those, but they may not have been taking seriously something like coffee or decaf coffee. They would have thought that was plenty good enough. But decaf coffee has, I don't know, about 25% of the caffeine that's in regular coffee. And as a result, it's plenty of caffeine in there to be disrupting sleep during the nighttime, during various sleep cycles. It's clearly obvious from the research evidence. And so what are you doing? You're just robbing the system of getting complete sleep. And what does that do? Well, who knows? You may never, just like people that eat a couple of candy bars every day of their life, or Dr. Pepper, they may never see a gross pathology from this, and they may never know what it would have been like to feel better from not doing it, and they may never pay any huge price for this, except that they kind of lived this thing in terms of they only ever felt 80% as good as a human being can feel. The same thing is, and they may have they increased their risk of trouble along the way, but they may have dodged those bullets. That's fine. 1 out of 5 smokers doesn't apparently pay any price in terms of their longevity from smoking. Wow. 1 out of 5. Okay. Spin the wheel, because the other 4 pay an 8 to 10 year price in their life. It's the largest single possible mistake that individuals make in terms of their health. So the next one would be diet, the next one would be sleep, the next one would be being sedentary. So but does everybody pay a price from cigarette smoking? No. Amazingly enough, it appears that 1 out of 5 literally just threads their way through a minefield of disasters and manages to walk upright on the other side. Okay, they lived to 92 years old, and they are icons for the world about how it doesn't matter whether you smoke or not, which is ludicrous. Okay, and so many people are going to use coffee, and they are going to disrupt their sleep cycles, and we will find ultimately, with enough research, that essentially it's going to turn out that people that are using decaf coffee are, instead of having a 38% chance of having dementia when they're 82 or 85, If they live that long, they have a 42% chance. It's like, and you might say, well, that doesn't seem that much different. 38, 42, maybe I'll have my coffee. It's like, yeah, but you might live a long time between your 85th birthday and your 95th birthday, and you might live 10 years demented, okay, that you would not have lived demented. So what are the odds? Maybe not that much more, maybe 1 in 25. But this is what we're here to do. We're here to be looking for the subtle but important details that can sometimes make the difference between health and disease, or success and failure. And things like caffeine and alcohol, these are things that are subtle but important factors. Many people will skate without any discernible damage. Some people will not. And, we're just here to let you know this is one of those things. And the way that caffeine is going to be doing its damage is it's going to be doing its damage through the quality and quantity of sleep that you're going to get. And the quality of sleep looks like it's a pretty big deal.
Thank you, Dr. Lisle. And I'm going to bust Kristen, because I always see her online at 3 a.m. when she's not. Not so good. So we have some questions about particular foods that people feel they need to include in the diet. And at the Ultimate Weight Loss Conference, Dr. Goldhammer was asked about this, and Dr. Barnard and Dr. Olivier, and they all said it's not necessary. But a lot of people in general, and people in the Ultimate Weight Loss program specifically, feel that if they don't eat nuts every day, they're not going to have longevity. They're not going to be able to absorb the micronutrients in their greens. If they don't eat legumes, they're told they're the most important predictor of survival. And the thing is we have people in the group that can't eat legumes. They are just either allergic or intolerant with things like IBS and SIBO. But some of these doctors say you have to eat legumes no matter what, eat a bean a day. But there are people that can't. And with the nuts, we have many people for whom in the group, if they eat one nut, they eat a pound. And in your book, The Pleasure Trap, you have a chapter about looking for health in all the wrong places, where people seem to be much more excited about deficiencies than what the real problem is, which is excess. So I wonder if you could speak to the fact that it's not like we're going to live 10 years longer from eating nuts and beans if they're causing us some kind of either gastric or mental distress.
This is just, I think I could tell you the story. I'll tell you the backstory. This was 20 years ago, and my father was in serious trouble. He was in his late 60s, and he had lectured to everybody that he ever ran into about how they should eat a vegan diet that his son was promoting. And then at his own dinner table, he would cheerfully and defiantly eat steak in front of me. And, like everybody else, it's not like he didn't know. So he was going to preach to everybody about what they should do, and they should listen to me and listen to Alan Goldhammer and John McDougall. But he himself wasn't going to do it, and didn't. And so by his late 60s, he had probably, now we know, had probably had several heart attacks, but he was tough enough and lucky enough that he kind of didn't know it. And then he finally had a pretty big event, and he was in the hospital, and it was almost an emergency bypass situation. And anyway, I was terrified enough, and he was terrified enough. And the long story short is that he had a bypass, and we probably wouldn't do it. Just tricky enough situation that we might even do it a second time. He was in the statistical category where theoretically he was better off. It was a rare kind of a situation. So we did it, and of course he almost died. He is extremely fortunate not to die. He was essentially counted out by the surgeon, and he managed to crawl his way out of this hole. And so we spent days staring at his blood pressure monitor and his kidney function monitoring in intensive care. And he amazingly crawled his way out. It's interesting that at the end of all this, I could tell that he'd had a significant hit in terms of brain damage when you have surgery that severe. So he wasn't as smart as he was before, but he was still him, and he came back, and he came back pretty well. And so about a year afterwards, I called him on his birthday, and he was down at my sister's place, and they were with my famous brother-in-law, Big D. And they were all cheerfully indulging themselves. And they were all, I think, happy that I wasn't there. And people know me, I'm not preachy, and I'm very easy to get along with. But they know that I know. And so my dad also, never one to back away from an argument, proudly announced to me that he was having salmon. And I wasn't happy about this conversation. And I said, essentially, you've got to be kidding me. You know, how close to the grave do you have to get before you get this message? How lucky do you have to get? And so he starts to argue with me about how he's read that you need the omega-3s. I said, you don't need anything. You're out of your mind. And this argument continued, which of course I started to win the content of this argument in a matter of seconds. And he was going to defy and defend. I said, listen, it's your life. You've been given a second chance. You're playing the cards, not me. You do it any way you want. But you're not going to convince me you're playing smart. That you won't do. Okay? I hung up the phone, and in the next 5 seconds, a memory came to me. I was at the back of an English class in 7th grade, and the guy that taught the class was a guy named Mr. Marco, and he was about 6'8", very geeky guy. Nice guy. And who was sitting next to me but Alan Goldhammer? And we're in the back of the class, and Alan, of course, has no interest in the class. All he wants to do is talk to me. He got me in trouble my whole life. I was constantly trying to keep us out of trouble, and he didn't seem to care. He never bothered Alan to get into trouble. So Alan is constantly talking to me, and he's not like in a whisper. So Mr. Marco, it goes like this. And Sherlock says to Watson, Alan, he says, Watson, this is elementary, Alan, and this goes on. And I'm anxious, and I'm telling him, shh, be quiet, shh, be quiet. And Alan keeps talking. Mr. Marco keeps telling Alan to be quiet. And I'm hearing the story behind this of Sherlock Holmes. And it's the case of Silver Blaze. And it's about the mystery of the strange incident, of the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. And how and Holmes keeps mentioning that that's the key to the mystery. And someone says, but the dog did nothing in the nighttime. And Holmes says, but that's the curious incident. Okay. And I remember that. That was in 7th grade, in the back of Mr. Marco's English class, and that little light went on in my head. And I thought, boy, is that an interesting concept. That something that you don't see winds up being incredibly important. I had that feeling again when I saw the magnificent movie, A Few Good Men. And Tom Cruise, at one moment, his mind is spinning as he's trying to figure out what goes on in this mystery of this young man who was killed by his comrades accidentally. And he has his baseball bat on his shoulder, and he goes into his closet, and he comes out of his closet, and he realizes that the closet of the young boy who they said was packed up to leave home was in perfect order when he had been killed, and therefore he was not packed up to go home as they were professing. And in that moment, essentially, he realizes it's what you didn't see is what's important. Same concept. The great mystery of A Few Good Men and how it's solved is solved by exactly the same principle that Sherlock solves the problem of the case of Silver Blaze. It's a fantastic thing of looking in the wrong place and knowing what to look for. And when I hung up the phone from my dad, you know, my right brain searched around in my great frustration that Alan and I had been talking to people for years about these things. And over again, for 20 years, we had been already answering questions about, yes, but where do you get your protein from? Yes, but where do you get your calcium? What about this? What about that? Everybody's so interested in talking about deficiencies, and nobody was interested in talking about excesses. And so that was the moment where I was fed up with my own father, who was trying to sell me on the idea that he had a deficiency of essential fatty acids, which is why it is that he damn near died. Okay? I'm like, no, I don't know who's selling you the snake oil, but as I would learn what John McDougall would say, people love to hear good news about their bad habits. Okay? And it's disgusting when you feel like the people on the other side of it are not interested in the truth. But all they're trying to do is sell people good news about their bad habits. So I can get real edgy about that. And I was edgy that day, and I hung up the phone, and I instantly realized that's an article I'm going to write. And so I wrote an article called Looking for Health in All the Wrong Places. It was beautifully edited by my good friend Jim Lennon, who is the past president of the American Natural Hygiene Society. Terrific man. And he edited this thing, and he loved that article. And he had pictures of Sherlock there. And then that became, that then morphed into a chapter in The Pleasure Trap, and it's one of my favorite chapters. And it's a pet peeve of mine, and certainly of Alan's, but we were so used to it, and we kick these problems back so quickly, we never take the time to like pound them into smithereens because we're so disgusted that the questions are even being asked, not by the well-meaning people, but by the fact that there's a background of music that is never shuts off about beating this drum that has no sense in being beaten. Okay? No, you don't need nuts. No, nuts are not going to help you live longer. It's ridiculous. And so any doctor that says so is not looking at the evidence. They think they may be looking at the evidence. Maybe they don't know how to read the evidence. But there's nothing special about nuts. Okay, they're a whole natural food as long as it's whole natural. They're a whole natural food that's no better and no worse than other whole natural foods. It has a problem that they're extremely calorically rich. Anybody that says it's not going to put weight on some people doesn't tell them the truth. Extremely high fat food, of course they're going to put fat on people. Depends on who you are. If you happen to be naturally really thin, you can eat hands full of nuts. Genetically, you can easily handle this and it's not a problem. But a lot of people will have a problem. Now, so the people that are saying that you need to eat this and you need to eat that in order to increase your likelihood of life, either, number one, are consciously not telling the truth, or number two, are ignorant and don't know what the facts are. If anybody wants to know, you can look up on the Cochrane Collaboration, which is the most respected independent medical scientific organization in the world. It's done by 28,000 volunteers. They are very sophisticated people. They hold very high degrees. You have to have a great deal of hoops that you must jump through in order to be a Cochrane collaborator. It's really not something simple to do. And the entire purpose of the Cochrane collaboration was the notion of being able to not look at one study and give an opinion, but to look at multiple studies and to combine them and to do a sophisticated analysis to try to figure out what the truth is, because they knew that there was a problem in science, that a rogue finding could set off a field. In other words, everybody could believe something that wasn't true. But what happens when you have a second finding that is in contradiction? Well, it could be that that could have happened randomly or through subtle issues in how it is that you do the study. So what if you do a third study and a fourth study? What if you were to combine the studies statistically and it would point you towards what the probable truth is? It's exactly like taking a poll in a presidential election or any other election. You don't want to really rely on one poll because it could be biased. You don't want to rely on the other poll. Everybody wants to point at the poll that they like. Doesn't this sound a lot like nuts? Let's point to the poll we like. I'll tell you a study that shows this. Really? How about if we combine all of the studies that are of sufficient quality that weren't paid for by nut purveyors, and let's look at what the outcomes are and find out from that. That's what you would do if you're a political scientist trying to find the truth of an election. And it's precisely what the Cochrane collaboration tries to do when they try to find out what medical procedures or medical hypotheses are true and which ones aren't true. And the Cochrane collaboration has looked at the nut issue and they've said there's nothing there. No surprise. If you told me that strawberries were a fantastic food that was going to save your life, I'd say that's baloney. There's nothing better or worse from a strawberry, from a peach, from an apple, from a piece of asparagus, than anything else under the sun. These are all foods that would be consistent with the natural history of the human animal. And the big problem isn't what's positive in the food. The big issue that hurts people is what excesses that your unnatural food is causing in terms of metabolic toxicity. That's the problem. Heart disease isn't caused by a deficiency of anything. It's caused by an excess of things that the body can't handle. Okay? So the deficiencies in life are sleep, exercise, and sunshine. Those are the deficiencies. The excesses are dietary drugs and dietary imbalances that are caused by a diet that's inconsistent with the natural history of the organism. So no, you don't need to eat some specific berries. You don't need to eat any specific greens. You don't need to eat any specific nuts. You don't need to eat anything specific. And I will take on anybody, anytime, and they have to face the following argument that under a withering fire of which there's no escape. You take a pathology, and then you can take your diet full of whatever superfoods you think are going to fix it, and I'll put them on a water fast and feed them nothing. Okay? We will find out that feeding people nothing will get sick people way faster, more effectively, more completely across a wider range of pathologies than any special superfood diet that you could ever give anybody. Okay? We'll take that experiment. I'll take on anybody. I will challenge them to take on something, for example, we've already published. Let's take on their superfoods against what we've shown in hypertension. See about that. Let's take their superfoods and see if they can get a reversal and a complete eradication of a stage 3 cancer that we have. These are published studies out of True North Health Center. So the answer to the question, you got me all hyped up, AJ, on my birthday. No, I can get passionate about this because I can just see people confused, frustrated, uncertain, and worried. Okay? I'm worried I'm not getting enough of this. I'm worried I'm not getting enough of that. And the answer is don't worry about getting enough of anything. The only thing you need to worry about is getting too much. Okay? Your job is to eat a reasonably balanced diet of healthy foods, get exercise, get sleep, get some sunshine. That's it. Okay? If you have some strange, unusual, bizarre pathology as a result of some kind of dysfunction or some genetic abnormality, it may be true that a very wise, knowledgeable nutritional doctor might know something that you can take in terms of concentrated nutrition that could have a pharmacological impact that would be useful. A very sharp medical doctor also might give you a medicine that might be able to Mickey Mouse your way and help some process as well. So there's a time and place for either concentrated nutrition or concentrated or medicine, literally a chemical alteration of your body that could be useful. But in general, in principle, in terms of the notion of how it is that we're going to support the health of the body, we are not going to support the health of the body by concentrated anything. Forget about it. Okay? And don't worry about needing to eat any kind of food. You need to eat nothing. You need to eat brown rice and broccoli, and you are good to go. You're not happy unless you're Alan Goldhammer, but you would be fine.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Lisle, because I have a very good friend watching this broadcast live that is absolutely obsessed with nutrient density. She will not eat rice. She will not eat potatoes. And so thank you for saying that. And
Sure.
it's like nutrient density paints everybody with the same brush, which I know you think is not ever really a good idea. So thank you for saying that. People are loving this. They're loving your laugh. They're all continuing to wish you happy birthday. And as far as feeding people nothing, we have watching live our good friend, Dr. Nate Gershfeld, who has a wonderful new fasting center in Yorba Linda, California. It is beautiful. And if you're lucky enough to be there, Dr. Lisle often lectures there live once a month. And so please, go to fastingescape.com and get more information. And you might be lucky enough to be there when Dr. Lisle is speaking. So I don't want to keep you 1 minute longer on your birthday. We do have more questions, but I'm hoping that you will come back next month and answer them.
Fantastic. You bet I will, AJ. It's
Absolutely. Have a happy birthday. And we appreciate you so much, Dr. Lisle.
All right. I'll see y'all soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching.